So last week, we heard from Eric Girard. He is the minister, beyond just Minister of Finance, minister responsible for Anglo relations. He said he'd like to see more anglophones in the provincial public sector because apparently we represent only about 1%. 1% of that workforce. Greg Kelly, the Liberal critic for relations with Anglos, spoke to him earlier today and asked him what he thought about that and whether he thinks something will actually change, or is this just a lot of hot air?
I will always welcome when a minister responsible for our community states that he will work on trying to improve the number of English-speaking Quebecers who are working in our civil service, but also who are, working within our Société d'État, so the hydros, the lotto, all that. I'm happy to hear it. But the next step is to see, will the proof be in the pudding, and can we move that needle from about 1% to even 1.5%. So I will be there to, my hand is extended to work with the minister if he ever wants to speak with community leaders, with different organizations to talk about how we can actually get this done. I'm all there, but I also will be there to remind the minister that he did say very clearly in parliamentary commission that it's something he wants to change. They have a 4-year mandate, so let's see what results they can draw.
When we're looking at these numbers, so 518 English speakers working in Quebec civil service, that's out of about 57,000 workers. You can't help but ask the question, how did we get here? How did we end up here? Do we have to kind of set that question aside and just move forward, Greg?
I think you always have to ask the question of why have we not been better in the past. Consecutive governments have spoken about this. And it is, hard to really pinpoint exactly why the community, it's a two-way street, I would say. Why has the Quebec government not done more recruiting in English-speaking community? And why is the English-speaking community not maybe that enthusiastic to go down to Quebec City and work in the civil service? There's definitely no doubt that we have a lot of competition with Ottawa for jobs. They actively recruit at our university campuses and try to get people to do stages and come work, go work in the federal civil service. But those are things, again, that I think if you were to go speak with the universities and speak with employment groups, the minister could definitely probably come up with some plans to try to change that. And he'll have to convince some of his colleagues because he's not alone. It is the minister who's responsible for the civil service is also the one who's responsible for the treasury. So she's the one that directs the civil service and does negotiations. So she would have to mobilize the machine with Mr. Girard to try and change some approaches that the government currently has with the community to try to change those numbers. And it is doable, but it will require political will.
So to be fair, I mentioned Eric Girard, the fact that he brought this up. He's a CACist. This problem, because this is nothing new, has been going on through previous governments as well, including a provincial Liberal government. Numbers have not been radically different over the last 8-12 years. Why was this never addressed before, Greg, do you think?
We tried to address it, actually, Aaron. If you remember when we created the Secretariat for speaking for Relations with English-speaking Quebecers, one of the things we did at the start was created a program with Concordia, the government, to try and look at this question. We did the same thing with bishops. We lost power, and then after that, I'm not too sure where those studies went, and the work to try to really push that, it was in the Premier's hands, and it seems like there wasn't tons of progress. So there have been efforts in the past, but again, one thing at least I heard, and I've heard as an M&A, when I was a political staffer, when you would go speak to community organizations, they would say, well, one thing, nobody tries to recruit us. And of course, it feels good when you're recruited. I remember when I went to Queens and I was doing my master's, Ottawa and Queen's Park, Toronto, they were there all the time trying to get us to go work in their civil service. And when I went to McGill, I never remember once seeing Emploi Quebec on the campus trying to get people to come work in the civil service. Another thing that, the community does identify is that they don't always feel that their French language skills are strong enough to work in whether it be the civil service or other fields. So that would also mean that the government would need to think a little bit more about how they can coordinate with the local. There's a public administration school in Quebec City, the LNAP, and there is a program right now to try to help English speakers adjust to the civil service and master the French language. But there would have to be, again, openness from the government to allow people to do stages, to improve their French, to make them feel at ease. So there are some policy solutions out there. And I think they really just need a good boost, whether it be from the minister or I said to some of his colleagues to really get this done. But hey, look, the civil service in Quebec, just like anywhere else, there's labor shortages. They're looking for talent. The English-speaking community We don't only just go to McGill, Concordia, Bishops. We go to Université de Montréal. We go to Université de Sherbrooke. We have a lot of talent in our youth, and they are bilingual, and it could be very helpful to the Quebec Civil Service. So I say, why not put two and two together? We're always worried about the retention of our youth. Go out and find them jobs. There's also a lot of civil service positions from the government of Quebec in Montreal, where 80% of the English-speaking community resides. I think we can definitely find ways to make this actually change. And I would be very happy, even if it is the CAC that does it, I would just be happy to see this statistic move in the right direction. And then maybe some examples, word of mouth, people will say, hey, working in the Quebec Civil Service is actually pretty great. And, the local programs we have at McGill, Concordia, and elsewhere, people start to say, you know what, I'm going to try to, make a go of it in the Quebec Civil Service because, of course, like in Ottawa or in Quebec, it's, these jobs are tough and, it's a career path that presents lots of challenges. So we just have to help young people want to do it.
Will Bill 96 help or hinder? Because I kind of feel like, practically speaking, on paper, it might actually help, but psychologically, you feel even less welcome.
That's a pretty good question, but I would say, at least for the civil service, the language, and this, dates back to Bill 101, the language is, of course, French in the Quebec Civil Service. So there's no doubt that for some English-speaking Quebecers, that might just be a barrier, the fact that they are not fully bilingual to feel like they can work in a French milieu. But that's why they got to go back to, the bill I presented that we've spoken about, making French language courses free and easily accessible and long-term training for the community. That is extremely important. So I'm not too sure if Bill 96 would add to maybe people saying, I don't feel welcome in the Quebec Civil Service. I'm not too sure. We'll have to see too, since the bill, is still relatively new and still being applied. But again, it would go, in my view, to just a larger and more positive message from the Quebec Civil Service and from the government saying, we want you, you can succeed in this environment, and your talents are needed. And again, that is a lot of recruiting that would have to be done in the community, and it's just not something that I see at this point in time.
So to your point, and we've raised this before, you're right about making free language courses in French available for people. I found it kind of rich last week after the feds announced that they'd be handing about $140 million over to Quebec, to English community groups here. And then the minister, Jean-François Roberge, actually came out and said, I hope they spend, or I hope all that money is used to basically have English courses, or French courses rather, available for Anglos in this province. And I thought to myself, when we talked about this, you brought this up, why has the government not moved on that at all provincially? Why would you think they would take federal money and try to use it to do that instead?
Yeah, I mean, look, if they want to, if some of that money that they have, because in Bill 96, they are creating a guichet de francisation. So it is this, this central place where you will be able to go get French language training. I'm not too sure how the rollout will go. It's going to happen this year. It's something to watch closely. And I will say this, that if you look through all the different documents that were tabled by English-speaking Quebec groups, community groups across the province, one thing they highlight is this French language training. So look, if some of the federal money that comes to Quebec is used for French language training for English-speaking Quebecers through Emploi Quebec, there's a lot of groups that will say, we don't have a problem with that. But I mean, every single dollar, I'm not too sure, there's organizations like Seniors Quebec for English speakers that, help break the isolation. Those types of programs are important. And there is a secretariat responsible for English-speaking Quebecers here in Quebec, and they should be working, to determine the money that will come from that official languages program, how best it can be spent. But I'm not going to say that if some of that money went to French language training, it would be a bad thing, because the community still is asking for this to be done, 4 years after I've tabled my bill.
Greg Kelly, Liberal MNA and official opposition critic for relations with Anglo-Quebecers. Greg, thanks so much for the time.
No problem, guys. Thanks a lot for having me.
Interesting, isn't it, that 4 years after bringing it up, the idea that, let's get French courses for any Anglo that wants to take them, still nothing done on the provincial side, yet the provincial government has the temerity to say, well, I hope some of that federal money will go for that.
We'll take that. We'll take the money for that if we have to spend it on something.
No details yet, by the way, on where that money, the roughly $137.5 million from the feds, is going to go, to who it goes to, where it would have to clear. We still don't know.